Today's video is sponsored by NordVPN, who are helping you get the most out of your internet experience. Look, everyone uses the internet a little bit differently, and that's all well and good, but what you don't want to do is leave yourself unprotected online. You might have heard me talk about what NordVPN could do for you previously. Encrypt your internet data, move your online activity to another location with just one click, either for security or streaming. All of that is still true. NordVPN has more than 5,000 servers in 60 countries. But VPNs give you access to so many more options than just new TV shows. Like, what if you wanted to buy a video game that's cheaper somewhere else or maybe not available in your country at all? NordVPN. Perhaps you're having trouble connecting to social media. NordVPN. Want to route your connection through multiple servers just for double-layered protection? NordVPN, yes! Right now, as part of a special deal, you guys can get a 2-year plan at a huge discount, plus an additional month for free. On top of that, what? And if you try NordVPN and change your minds, 30-day money-back guarantee. All you got to do is go to nordvpn.com/TIFO. Again, nordvpn.com/TIFO. For a 2-year deal at a huge discount plus a free month, or just follow the link in the description box below. And now today's video. At some point or another, all of us have had to deal with people who are not, shall we say, firing on all cylinders. Thankfully, the English language provides us a variety of words to describe such people, such as idiot, imbecile, or if you're feeling particularly nasty, moron. But the next time you feel like insulting someone's intelligence, you may wish to think twice before using these terms, for their origin is far darker than you might realize. Once upon a time, these terms, like the now taboo retarded, were considered genuine medical diagnoses and could get a person committed to an asylum, forcibly sterilized, or worse. They are the deceptively innocuous legacy of a disturbing pseudo-scientific movement that thrived across the world in the first half of the 20th century: Eugenics. The term eugenics, derived from the Greek words meaning good breeding, was coined in 1883 by British polymath Francis Galton. Based on principles of animal breeding, Mendelian inheritance, and the evolutionary theories of Galton's half-cousin Charles Darwin, eugenics held that desirable human traits such as intelligence and morality were genetically determined and that society could be gradually improved through the application of selective breeding. Galton proposed 2 methods for accomplishing this: positive eugenics, in which those with desired traits were encouraged to breed, and negative eugenics, in which those with undesirable traits such as low intelligence, alcoholism, or habitual criminality were discouraged or outright prevented from doing so via forced sterilization if necessary. Galton's timing could not have been better, for the introduction of his theories coincided with both the ongoing Industrial Revolution, which saw millions of rural poor flood from the countryside into the cities to work in mills and factories, and the rapid expansion of Britain's colonial empire. These trends stoked fears among the ruling classes about the physical and moral degeneration of the British population and the rise of crime and poverty brought about by uncontrolled breeding of people of inferior stock. The seemingly objective scientific principles of eugenics appeared to offer a solution and were readily embraced by the scientific and political establishment to justify existing supremacist notions regarding race and class. But while eugenics originated in Britain, this particular brand of scientific racism and classism found its most enthusiastic advocates in the United States, where it was used to justify discrimination against blacks and the millions of European immigrants that were streaming into the country every year. And among the leading figures in American eugenics was psychologist Dr. Henry H. Goddard. From 1906 to 1918, Goddard served as the director of research at the Vineland Training School for feeble-minded girls and boys in Vineland, New Jersey, where children with intellectual disabilities were taught practical skills like woodworking and sewing in order to turn them into a productive member of society. Here, Goddard established one of the world's first laboratories devoted to the study of intellectual disability. At the time, the scientific study of intelligence was a brand new field, only recently pioneered by French psychologist Alfred Binet. In 1899, the French government passed a law mandating compulsory public education for all children aged 6 to 14. Concerned that certain children might have undiagnosed intellectual disabilities and could fall behind in their schooling, the government formed a special committee to develop methods of identifying such children so that they could be placed in special education programs. Binet, along with his assistant Theodore Simon, assembled a group of 50 children and evaluated their performance on a series of simple cognitive tasks. But as no single task proved reliably capable of revealing a child's intelligence on its own, Binet and Simon combined the results of multiple tests to create a baseline for the average mental abilities of a child in a certain age group, their so-called mental age. In 1905, the two researchers distilled their methodology into a standard intelligence test for French schoolchildren, which became known as the Binet-Simon test. The test consisted of 30 cognitive tasks of increasing difficulty, such as asking a child to follow a beam of light, answer simple verbal questions, name various body parts, memorize and repeat short strings of numbers, and construct a sentence from 3 given words. While the Binet-Simon test became standard across France, its results were complex and difficult to interpret. This was soon solved by German psychologist William Stern, who came up with the idea of dividing a child's mental age by their physical age and multiplying the result by 100 to yield their intelligence quotient, better known today as IQ. According to this system, an IQ of 100 indicates that a child's intelligence is average for their age group, while an IQ below 100 may indicate some kind of developmental delay. While the term IQ is still widely used today, the concept of mental age is not as easily applied to adults, so the methodology behind modern IQ tests is different from that of Binet, Simon, and Stern. The Binet-Simon test was adopted by multiple countries, including the United States, where it was translated, adapted, and promoted by psychologist Louis Terman as the Stanford Binet test. In addition to evaluating school children, the Stanford Binet test was also used by the US government to gauge the intelligence of soldiers, with over 1.7 million military recruits being evaluated in the lead up to the First World War. But as you have probably guessed by now, the test was also eagerly embraced by eugenicists as another weapon in their discriminatory arsenal, in large part thanks to the work of Dr. Henry Goddard. Goddard was among the first Americans to translate the original Binet-Simon intelligence test into English and immediately applied it to his research at the Finland School. Like his fellow eugenicists, Goddard believed that low intelligence, mental illness, idleness, criminality, and other undesirable traits were genetically determined and could eventually be bred out of the population by discouraging or preventing those displaying these traits from breeding and passing on their defective genes. However, in order to determine which people should be allowed to breed and which should not, a system was needed to classify human intelligence. On May 8, 1910, at an annual meeting of the American Association for the Study of the Feeble-Minded, Goddard presented a system which classified the mentally deficient into 3 main categories according to IQ. Those with an IQ of 0 to 25, corresponding to a mental age of 2, were classified as idiots. The term idiot comes from Greek, translating roughly to private individual or layperson, the original connotation being that a person who cares only about their own affairs and does not participate in public life is a fool. Going up the scale, those with an IQ of 26 to 50, corresponding to a mental age of 3 to 7, were classified as imbeciles, from the Latin imbecilus, meaning feeble-minded. For the highest category, those with an IQ of 51 to 70 or a mental age of 8 to 12, Goddard initially struggled to find an appropriate label. At the time, people with moderate intellectual disabilities were generally termed as feeble-minded, but Goddard thought that this lacked precision. After considering a number of candidates, including deviates, fools, and almosts, he finally settled on moron, from the Greek moros, or dull. According to Goddard, morons possessed the greatest threat to America's genetic fitness, for unlike idiots and imbeciles, they could be mistaken for normal people, and thus unknowingly insinuate their inferior genes into the general population. Quote, "The idiot is not our greatest problem. He is indeed loathsome, nevertheless, he lives his life and is done. He does not continue the race with a line of children like himself. It is the moron type that makes, for us, our great problem." In his 1911 work, Heredity of the Feeble-Mindedness, Goddard further expanded upon this taxonomy, introducing an elaborate system of code letters to classify various categories of genetic infirmity: A for alcoholism, B for blindness, C for criminality, D for deafness, DWF for dwarfism, E for epilepsy, F for feeble-mindedness, I for insanity, M for migraine, N for normal, SX for sex offenders, SY for syphilis, T for tuberculosis, and W for wanderers, tramps, and truants. As part of his research, Goddard assembled elaborate genealogical records of the families of supposed morons, labeling each member with these code letters in order to trace the passage of genetic infirmity from generation to generation. And the most famous of these families were the Kallikaks. In his most famous work, 1912's The Kallikak Family, a study in the heredity of feeble-mindedness, Goddard describes one of the students of the Vineland School, 23-year-old Deborah Kallikak. Quote, "One bright October day, 14 years ago, there came to the training school at Vineland a little 8-year-old girl. She had been born in an almshouse. Her mother had afterwards married, not the father of this child, but the prospective father of another child, and later had divorced him and married another man who was also the father of some of her children. One, the plea that the child did not get along well at school and might possibly be feeble-minded. She gained admission to the training school there to begin a career which has been interesting and valuable to the institution and which has led to an investigation that cannot fail to prove of great social import. Examining Deborah's family history, Goddard discovered a startling pattern which seemed to confirm all of his theories. Deborah and her extended family, he concluded, were all descended from a single Revolutionary War hero, Martin Kallikak. In 1776, Kallikak married a devout Quaker woman, siring generations of descendants who showed no sign of genetic feebleness. At one point, however, he had an affair with an unnamed feeble-minded barmaid. In stark contrast with Kallikak's marriage, this dalliance resulted in a lineage plagued by disability, alcoholism, mental illness, and criminality, what Goddard termed a race of defective degenerates. Considered one of the foundational texts of American eugenics, the Kallikak family sold thousands of copies and was even considered for adaptation into a Broadway play. It was also a giant lie. Deborah Kallikak's real name was Emma Wolverton, the name Kallikak being a pseudonym concocted by Goddard from the Greek words kalos and kakos, meaning good and bad. While intended to protect his subjects' privacy, the name concealed the fact that the supposedly pure and degenerate sides of the Kallikak family were completely unrelated. Martin Kallikak Jr., the supposed offspring of Martin Kallikak Sr. and the barmaid, was in fact John Wolverton, the son of Gabriel Wolverton and his wife Catherine Murray, and of a completely separate lineage from Emma Wolverton, aka Deborah Kallikak. Far from being degenerate or simple-minded, John was a landowner prosperous enough to buy 2 tracts of land for cash in 1809. And while the supposedly bad side of the Wolverton family did include many poor illiterate farmers and at least one case of Down syndrome, it also provided several teachers, a bank treasurer, and an Army Air Corps pilot. And in those cases where intellectual disability was present, modern researchers have pointed to environmental factors, including nutritional deficiencies and fetal alcohol syndrome, as likely explanations. Even Deborah Kallikak herself was likely not as cognitively impaired as Goddard paints her in his book. Records from the Vineland School reveal that while Deborah experienced significant delays in reading and writing, she was an accomplished seamstress and woodworker and was so socially competent that visitors often mistook her for a member of the staff. This suggests that Deborah merely suffered from a learning disability like dyslexia. More damning still, in his 1981 book, The Mismeasure of a Man, paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould alleged that the photographs of the degenerate side of the Kallikak family published in Goddard's book were deliberately retouched, the eye sockets darkened to make individuals look less intelligent and more sinister. Others, however, have argued that this was a common practice at the time, meant to restore facial features that would otherwise be washed out by photographic reproduction. Furthermore, the foundation of Goddard's theories was that morons could not be reliably identified by sight, hence the need for formalized intelligence testing. But whatever the case, even contemporary critics quickly saw through Goddard's fabrications, and within 10 years he was forced to admit the flaws in his methodology and recant the book's conclusions. In the meantime, Goddard turned his attention to what he saw as a potentially disastrous source of inferior genes: immigrants. According to the US Census Bureau, between 1901 and 1910, nearly 9 million people immigrated to the United States, mainly from Italy, Germany, and what was then the Austro-Hungarian Empire. While immigration officers had for years administered cursory health and mental illness screenings for new arrivals, Goddard worried that these methods were insufficiently objective and precise and would allow too many morons to get through undetected. In 1913, Goddard sent a team of female assistants to the Ellis Island Immigration Center in New York to administer Stanford-Binet tests to new arrivals. Women were chosen for this task as Goddard felt that they were more intuitive and would be able to spot the feeble-minded on sight. Altogether, Goddard and his assistants tested 152 immigrants, comprising 35 Jews, 22 Hungarians, 50 Italians, and 45 Russians. Tellingly, all those tested were from third or steerage class, though tests were administered to those traveling in second or first class. To Goddard's astonishment, the results revealed that 83% of the Jews, 80% of the Hungarians, 79% of the Italians, and 80% of the Russians Russians arriving in America were feeble-minded, leading him to remark, "Doubtless the theory in every reader's mind is the same as in ours, that it is impossible that half of such a group of immigrants could be feeble-minded, but we know that it is never wise to discard a scientific result because of apparent absurdity." Still, Goddard distrusted such extreme numbers, and after adjusting the threshold for feeble-mindedness, came up with a much more reasonable figure of around 40% for all groups. At no point, however, did Goddard question the basic methodology of the tests, such as the fact that they were exclusively administered in English, a language that few new arrivals spoke well. Nonetheless, Goddard's results led to the widespread adoption of intelligence testing for new immigrants, and the following year, deportations due to feeble-mindedness more than doubled. Goddard's work also strongly influenced the 1924 Immigration Act, which placed strict quotas on immigrants from non-Western countries and remained in effect until 1965. It's worth noting here that despite recent claims to the contrary, Goddard's views on eugenics were nowhere near as extreme as many of his contemporaries. While early in his career, Goddard advocated for the forced sterilization of those deemed genetically unfit, he later dismissed this idea as unworkable and inhumane, and instead suggested that special colonies be established where the feeble-minded could be sequestered away from regular society. Quote, "Such colonies would save an annual loss in property and life due to the action of these irresponsible people, sufficient to nearly or quite offset the expense of the new plant." In 1927, however, Goddard rejected even this notion, conceding that the feeble-minded could be more easily educated than he had previously assumed, and that they should be allowed to have children if they wanted them. Nor did Goddard suggest that the results of immigrants' intelligence tests reflected the general population of their home countries, suggesting instead that those arriving in America in steerage had self-selected for poverty and feeble-mindedness. But whatever Goddard's actual views, the damage was already done, and the work of Goddard and others, like educator Harry Laughlin, inspired many U.S. states to enact eugenics-based legislation. In the 1920s and 1930s, an astonishing 32 states passed laws mandating compulsory sterilization of the feeble-minded, the insane, habitual criminals, unwed mothers, Native Americans, and other supposed degenerates, resulting in over 60,000 involuntary surgeries throughout the 20th century. In the South, black women were forcibly sterilized en masse, the procedure becoming so common that it acquired the nickname Mississippi appendectomy. While such laws might seem blatantly unconstitutional, shockingly, they were actually upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1924, the state of Virginia passed its Eugenical Sterilization Act, wishing to determine whether the law would stand up to a legal challenge. On September the 10th of that year, Albert Priddy, superintendent of the Virginia State Colony for Epileptics and the Feeble-Minded, filed a petition to the institution's board of directors to sterilize 18-year-old patient Carrie Buck. According to Priddy, Buck, who he claimed had a mental age of 9, had been born illegitimately to a 52-year-old mother with a mental age of 8 and a long history of prostitution and immorality, and had herself proved incorrigible and became pregnant out of wedlock. Consequently, Priddy argued she proposed a genetic threat to society and should be sterilized in the interest of public welfare. In reality, Buck had been raped by one of her cousins, her subsequent diagnosis as feeble-minded and commitment to the Virginia State Colony being part of her family's attempt to protect its reputation. Nonetheless, Priddy's petition and Virginia's Sterilization Act were upheld by the Supreme Court Associate Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., who argued that the law did not violate the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, stating, "We have seen more than once that the public welfare may call upon the best citizens for their lives. It would be strange if it could not call upon those who already sap the strength of the state for these lesser sacrifices, often not felt to be such by those concerned, to prevent our being swamped with incompetence. It is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. The principle that sustains compulsory vaccination is broad enough to cover cutting the fallopian tubes." Holmes, upon examining Buck, her mother, and her children, all poor, uneducated Southern whites, also infamously declared, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough." While the legal case for forced sterilization was significantly weakened by the 1942 Skinner and Oklahoma ruling and the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act, the Supreme Court has never officially overturned Buck and Bell. As well as being administered to new immigrants starting in the 1890s, Stanford Binet and other intelligence and literacy tests were widely used in southern states as a prerequisite for voting. Though intended to disenfranchise poor, uneducated black voters, such policies soon backfired as they also tended to exclude poor, uneducated whites. However, this problem was quickly solved by declaring that anyone whose grandfather possessed the right to vote before the Civil War would retain that right regardless of education. This neatly allowed nearly all whites to vote while excluding blacks whose grandfathers had largely been slaves before the war. Such exemptions were known as grandfather clauses, yet another seemingly innocuous term that you'll never look at the same way again. If all of this sounds disturbingly fascist, that's because the Nazis took direct inspiration from the American eugenics movement for their own genocidal projects, with Hitler writing in Mein Kampf, "There is today one state in which at least weak beginnings toward a better conception of immigration are noticeable. Of course, it is not our model German Republic, but the US." Hitler, however, took eugenics to far greater extremes. In addition to forcibly sterilizing 600,000 people deemed hereditarily unfit, the Nazis carried out the Actian T4 euthanasia program, in which 300,000 psychiatric patients and other so-called useless eaters or lives unworthy of living were murdered via lethal injection or gas chamber. While one would think that the defeat of the Third Reich and the revelation of Nazi crimes against humanity would have put an end to eugenics programs worldwide, forced sterilization of the mentally ill, indigenous peoples, and other groups continued in developed Western countries like Canada, the United States, and Sweden well into the, wait for it, 1980s. As recently as 2017, Tennessee Judge Sam Benningfield was reprimanded for offering shorter prison sentences to inmates willing to undergo vasectomies or receive the birth control implant Nexplanon, explaining that, quote, "I'm trying to help these folks begin to think about taking responsibility for their life and giving them a leg up. You know, when they get out of jail to perhaps rehabilitate themselves and not be burdened again with unwanted children and all that comes with that." Such proposals, along with the increasing sophistication of gene editing technology, has raised dark fears that the specter of eugenics may once again be raising its ugly head. So the next time you're tempted to call someone out on their latest boneheaded decision, think carefully about the words you use and the legacy of cruelty, suffering, and discrimination they might conceal. And if anyone calls you a moron, well, just remember, it could be worse. And now for some bonus facts. Another common insult that used to be a legitimate medical diagnosis is the term cretin. Unlike idiot, imbecile, and moron, however, cretinism referred not to a general category of intelligence, but rather a specific physiological condition. Congenital iodine deficiency syndrome caused by a lack of iodine in a mother's diet during pregnancy. Iodine is used by the thyroid gland in the throat to produce the hormones thyroxine and triiodothyronine, which are essential for regulating the growth and development of the body. Severe iodine deficiency at birth interferes with this development, leading to a wide variety of symptoms, including swelling of the thyroid gland, also known as goiter, dwarfism, thickened skin, hair loss, delayed onset of puberty, infertility, and severe cognitive impairment. Most natural iodine comes from the ocean, entering the soil and thus the food chain via ocean spray or rainfall. Congenital iodine deficiency thus typically occurs in regions far inland where this iodine cannot reach. Up until the mid-20th century, cretinism was endemic to a large swath of the northern United States, and it was known as the goiter belt, and it was common to find villages in the European Alps where nearly the entire population was afflicted with the condition. However, the introduction of iodine-fortified foods such as iodized table salt has all but eliminated the disease in most developed nations, though it remains endemic in regions of China, India, and Central Africa. The origin of the term cretin is debated by historians and etymologists, with some positing that it is derived from either the Latin creta or chalk, referring to the pale skin of the afflicted, or cretera, the Swiss Romansh word for creature. The most widely accepted theory, however, is that the word is an Alpine dialect pronunciation of the French Charetian or Christian, referring either to the inherent humanity of those suffering from the condition or to the childlike inability of the worst affected to tell right from wrong, making them, like Jesus Christ, incapable of sin. And now for another bonus fact. As demonstrated by the case of the Kallikak family, most cases of endemic intellectual disability in rural America, which eugenicists ascribe to inferior genetics, were in fact largely caused by environmental factors like nutritional deficiency. The practice of growing monocultures of wheat, corn, and other crops resulted in unbalanced diets deficient in vital nutrients, leading to diseases like pellagra, scurvy, and rickets. Left untreated from an early age, such diseases can lead to severe physical and cognitive impairment, leading to the stereotype of the stupid, lazy hillbilly. But the disease which contributed the most to this image of rural America was caused not by nutritional deficiency, but rather a parasite, Necator americanus, better known as the hookworm. Endemic across much of the American South until the 1950s, hookworms reproduce via a complex life cycle. Hookworm larvae live in warm, moist soil and typically enter the host's body through the feet, burrowing through the skin and causing a telltale irritation known as ground itch or dew itch. The larvae then enter the bloodstream and travel to the lungs, irritating the tissue and inducing a dry cough. Every time the host coughs, larvae are expelled from the lungs into the throat and are swallowed, allowing them to reach the gut. Once in the gut, the larvae mature into adults and latch onto the intestine lining, where they feed on the host's blood for up to 5 years. The hookworm's eggs are expelled with the host's feces and return to the soil, starting the whole cycle over again. For this reason, hookworm is far more prevalent in rural areas lacking adequate sanitation. The steady loss of blood caused by hookworm infection can cause severe iron deficiency, leading to extreme fatigue and listlessness, cognitive impairment or brain fog, emaciation, a distended abdomen, and increased susceptibility to other diseases. Infections in children are particularly dangerous and can lead to permanent developmental delays. Indeed, a 1926 study of Alabama schoolchildren conducted by W.G. Smiley and C.R. Spencer found that the greater the number of hookworms a child was infected with, the lower their IQ. The authors noting that, quote, "One has the impression that the hookworm-infected child is living in another entirely separate world and is only remotely in contact with the everyday world around him." At its height, hookworm infection is thought to have affected up to 40% of the rural population from southeastern Texas to West Virginia, holding back development in the region. In 1901, however, a public health campaign funded by oil tycoon John D. Rockefeller began to turn back the tide, and by 1985, most of the American South was declared hookworm-free. Yet the harmful stereotypes bred by this unfortunate epidemic still persist. So, if the sound of banjos makes your hair stand on end, blame the hookworm, or perhaps the film Deliverance.